Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another Blender tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you a really easy and straightforward way to make realistic looking water. And water is super important in a scene. I've been kind of on this like mystical fantasy places kick, and I've made a couple new renders, showing lots of statues and stuff and beautiful, weird fantasy-like landscapes. And I've had a consistent theme in all of them, which is this sailboat that sort of goes around and explores all these different places. Since it's a sailboat, it's got to be on water. And so I've been using a couple different techniques to make water, and I'd like to show you one of them today. So this technique is really, really useful because it renders really quickly. It doesn't use any fancy simulation stuff, and it's very straightforward and easy to learn. So this is the an example of one of the scenes that I've had that uses water. So you can see it's got like the two statues and these big rocks, and the sailboat's sitting on this patch of water. And if we zoom in, we can actually see the water, and it renders really quickly, but it looks still pretty realistic. And you can see like the reflections and everything, and it holds up very well even if you look at like different angles and stuff, looking from far off or looking close up. It holds up pretty well, and this is a really, really useful technique. I also used it in this other render, which is my most recent one. We got like a little golden temple up here with some floating rocks and our familiar sailboat. And I've used a very similar water technique here to make the sailboat and it pushing the waves around and stuff. And so I want to take you through how I make that kind of water today. So we're making this scene, which is just a little cube floating in some nice relaxing water. You can see there's some waves around it, and it's disrupting the water a little bit. And I'm going to show you guys how to make that. So start by opening up Blender. We're going to be using Blender 3.0 today. And as usual, to delete everything, to start with a nice empty scene. Don't forget to save your file. Blender has been crashing a lot for me as of late. So don't forget to save. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly lightweight render though, so nothing to worry about here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the plane that will be our water. So let's add a quick plane. So Shift A. Oh, and you know what? I'll just turn on the screencast keys so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And if you look in the bottom left corner, you'll see any key I'm clicking or mouse move I'm making. So hit Shift A and then click on Mesh and then Plane to add a plane. And now we're going to scale it up like a lot, like 50 times. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put a little cube here and set up our camera and everything before we go onto the water. So let's Shift A again, add a little cube. You can see our little cube here. Let's shrink it down a little bit by hitting S on your keyboard and then scaling it by moving your mouse around. And now we're going to add a camera. So Shift A, camera. And our camera's somewhere in the scene. There it is. Before we do that, we're going to move the cube out of the way a little bit. So right click to select the cube, hit G, and then Shift Z to move it in only the X and Y direction. And we're going to move it somewhere over here onto the right edge of the plane. And now we're going to position our camera so we're kind of looking at it, the cube and the water like this, so we'll get a nice zoom in view of the water and the stuff behind it. So just position your viewport like this using the middle mouse to move around, and hit Control Alt number pad 0, and that will align the camera to your view. If you don't have a number pad, you can just do View and then Align View and Align Active Camera to View, and that'll have the same effect. So now we can move this around just a little bit more. So right click to select the camera, then hit G and drag the camera around a little bit. We can zoom into the cube a bit, and I think that's pretty good. So we're going to move the cube up a little bit by right clicking on it, hitting G and then Z to move it up, and then rotating it just a teeny bit with R to make it look like it's floating along. And we're pretty much done with the setup of the scene. You can make a couple modifications to the cube. For the render I showed, I added a little bevel modifier by going to the modifiers panel here. It's got the little wrench on it, modifier properties, and then clicking add modifier, and then clicking on bevel. You turn up the amount to like a little bit, and then it's like 0.14, and then add a couple segments so that it's nice and round. And you can smooth it out by hitting spacebar, typing smooth, and then shade smooth, excuse me. Okay, so now we've got our scene pretty much set up. Last thing we're going to do to modify the scene is to add some lighting. So click in the world properties panel here, and we're going to add an HDRI. There's a particular HDRI that I like to use, but you can use any HDRI you want. It doesn't really matter for this kind of scene. Just any lighting will do. So I like using this one. And let's take a look at how everything's looking. So click on your render properties, switch over to cycles, and then if you have a GPU, use your GPU. And then in the output properties, click render region so it only renders inside of the camera and not the world outside of it. And now hit Z on your keyboard and then click rendered, and we get to see what everything's looking like. And I like it. I'm going to move the cube around so it looks a little bit more like it's, you know, having a dandy little time floating along the waves. And we have to actually make the waves first. So let's do that. So you can keep it in rendered view so we can see what we're doing. And now if you hover your mouse up here in the left corner, you'll see this little crosshairs. So if we click and drag that, we will get these two panels. And now we're going to change this panel by clicking up here to shader editor. So just hit N on your keyboard to get rid of that side window. Click on the plane, which is going to be our water. You can rename it if you like. And hit new to give it a new texture. So now you can see we've got this principled BSDF node outputting to this material output node, and if we change the settings and everything, if we change the settings around, you can affect the properties of the material. So we're actually not going to play with this too much. Basically, all we're going to do is going to turn up the metallic setting all the way to 1, and then turn the roughness setting down to like 0.08-ish. So you can see that we're getting like this nice reflection, and the reflection of the cube is blurred a bit. But that's all we're going to do for the principled BSDF shader. The real magic is going to come when we modify the displacement, which is this little node entry point right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A, and we're going to add a noise texture. So if you Control Shift click, actually make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which will allow you to use nice shortcuts like that Control Shift click. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, and then under Add-ons to search for Node Wrangler, make sure Node Wrangler is checked off. So if you Control Shift click on the noise texture, we can see what it gives us, and it gives us this like weird cloudy thing. And we're going to modify this a bit. So we're going to add a color ramp to the node texture, and then we're going to click on the noise texture and then hit Control T, which will add this mapping and generate a node. And now what we can see is that if we, for example, move this location item, we can move the noise around. If we change the scale on the noise texture, we can make it bigger or smaller, and we can make it sharper or darker by changing the values of this color ramp. So that's why we add these couple nodes. So switch back to including your principled BSDF, and now take the output of your color ramp and plug it into the displacement texture, and you can immediately see we get something that looks pretty good. But these waves look kind of enormous, so we can scale them down by increasing the scale here, and this is already looking pretty decent. You can play with it to get whatever you're kind of looking for, and you can play with the color ramp so you can make them sharper or sort of more or less frequent. You can add more detail or less detail, whatever your kind of fits the needs of your scene. I'm gonna go for a little bit of detail, maybe like a slightly larger scale. And lastly, you can change the height of the waves by doing Shift A, adding a math node, inserting it in between the color ramp and the displacement, clicking add and changing it to multiply, and then you can change how harsh the displacement is by changing this value. So I like to set it something light, like 0.3 or 0.4, I think is good. So now you can already kind of see what we have in mind here. You can see how the texture is doing its thing. And this displacement texture just immediately makes realistic water. You can see how it's handling the reflections and everything, and it just looks really, really nice and clean. And it's so fast. You can see even this is cycles, and we're just having no trouble rendering this quickly at all. And even though you can see how beautiful the reflections look and everything. And the best part is if you want to animate it, it's really straightforward. You just animate, dislocation or any of the parameters, and it'll look really, really realistic. So this is a really, really convenient trick. Now we're going to do one more additional thing, which is not something you have to do. Honestly, this looks fine as is. First, I want to just change the lighting a little bit. So we're going to go to the world panel here, click on this HDRI node and hit Control T. And now if we change the Z setting on this mapping node, we can change the lighting. So I'm going to just make the lighting so the cube is lit from the side. I think it looks cooler. Okay, so now we're going to, what I want to do is I want to add like some ripples around the cube specifically. And this is a pretty cool technique using sculpting. And it's really helpful if you want to add some dynamics without having to simulate a bunch of stuff using like dynamic paint or a simulator. Although dynamic paint's not that heavy, but so I'm going to show you how to do this. I think it's a pretty cool technique. I don't see a lot of people using this specifically, so I'm happy to share it. I'm sure other people have, but this is a technique I particularly like. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on the plane and hit Tab to go into edit mode, and now you're going to subdivide it by hitting W and clicking subdivide 1 or 2 times. And then you're going to select just the faces immediately around the cube and hit W and then subdivide again a couple times. And you're going to keep doing this, so select more and more of the faces right around the cube until you have some decent subdivisions right here. Because you're only going to modify this part of this plane, so you don't need all the rest to be subdivided. So now we go back from our point of view, we see nothing has changed. So let's hop out of the rendered view and click over into the sculpting tab. And now we're going to switch to the camera view, switch back to the rendered view, and we have a bunch of options over here. If you haven't used the sculpting before, you just use your mouse to click and drag and make stuff happen. Check off this box here, dynamic topology. That will make it so that you don't have to worry about subdivisions really. But you can see if we like, I guess I really don't have. Oh, yeah, I guess I really do need subdivisions there. All right. Let's see. Strength. Turn on the radius. Does this work? I just want to exit a rendered mode. Oh, whoa. Okay, so it was doing something. It just doesn't update it in the render. That's pretty interesting. That's so bizarre. Okay, I have no idea why it's doing that, but all right. That's quite strange. All right, so you can see that you can draw around with this stuff and use your mouse to add different elements to the mesh using this sort of sculpting technique. What we're going to use is make sure Gentopo is checked off. We're going to use this cloth tool. So if we push with the cloth tool a bit, you can actually see that it makes this cool wave effect. So if you click and drag with the cloth tool, it'll make this nice wave effect. And if we go and see how it looks from the rendered point of view, we see nothing for some baffling reason. Does it show it here? Oh, here we go. Okay, I have no idea why it doesn't show it in sculpting. But you can see just by that one little click of the paint, just clicking on this cloth tool and then clicking and dragging across, it adds this really nice little texture. You can smooth it out a bit by clicking on the smooth texture here and then just smoothing out some of it. That might be a little bit too strong of a smooth, so you can smooth it out a bit. And then just make sure when you go back into your view here, just make sure your object is being shaded smoothly, and you're pretty much done. You have this nice, like, sort of quasi-realistic looking water motion with no simulation cost, renders extremely quickly. It's a fun technique. So we're almost done. We're just going to make the render look pretty now. So if we right-click on the camera view and click on the camera settings in the bottom right here, and then click check off depth of field, we can add some depth of field effect to the image. So Shift A in the viewport and add an empty. This will be our. Oh, actually, we don't need to add the empty because we can just use the cube as our focus. So stay clicked on the camera and click the focus object to be your cube. And now turn the f-stop down something like ridiculous, like 0.5. Or even lower, 0.1 maybe. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. 0.2. Yeah, okay, I think that's a good middle ground. And you can see we've got a really nice effect here. So we're going to render it really quickly. Just click on your render properties tab and turn down the samples to like 512. Make sure denoising is checked off. You don't need more than that. I hit function F12 to render. It's going to take a second. All right, and it looks like it's done. Perfect. So now we're going to just add some bloom and we'll be all good. So click over to the compositing section, click on use nodes, and then hit Control-Shift-Click on the render layers to add the viewer tab. And we're going to zoom out of this view by hitting N, clicking view, and then zooming out. If you click on the viewer tab, you can then click on this little button in the middle and move it over here. All right, and now we just Shift A, add a glare node, connect it to the composite and the viewer, add some fog glow, turn down the threshold to 0, and then turn it up by increments of 0.1 until it looks nice. I like that. And you're pretty much done at this stage. So you can use this technique for any scene that involves water. It's really, really easy, really, really fast. One of my favorite techniques in Blender because it's so accessible for beginners and advanced users alike. and it's like it's a really useful technique in my opinion. So the most important thing always is to play around the settings until you get something that looks nice. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, leave them in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more stuff like this, and I'll see you in the next video.